Grace Cooper clutched her cell phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her husband's voice echoed in her ear, his words burning like acid. The sinking feeling in her stomach told her what her mind refused to accept. Something wasn't right. Charlotte got worse overnight. Robert's voice crackled through the phone. I need to head over there today instead of tomorrow. She's all alone, Grace. Grace tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and adjusted her glasses, staring at the hospital schedule pinned to their refrigerator. Just 3 hours earlier, her sister-in-law Claire had called with completely different news. Mom's doing much better today, Claire had said cheerfully. I'm taking her to my place for the weekend. She's looking forward to my pot roast. You two don't need to come anymore? Grace had been relieved at first. She'd been working double shifts at Memorial Hospital all week, covering for a colleague on maternity leave. The thought of a quiet weekend at home with just her and Rob had seemed like a blessing. 12 years of marriage and quality time together had become increasingly rare. Rob, that's strange, Grace said carefully, measuring her words. Claire just called saying your mom was feeling better and she's taking her to her house for the weekend. A pause. Too long. Then, Claire must be confused. Mom called me directly. She's running a fever again and can barely get out of bed. Grace's training as an emergency room nurse had taught her to recognize patterns. The slight tremor in his voice, the defensive tone, the inconsistent story. These were the same signs she'd observed in patients trying to hide the truth about their injuries. Do you want me to come with you? She asked, already knowing the answer. I could ask Jenny to cover my Saturday shift. No need, he responded too quickly. You've been working so hard, babe. Get some rest. I'll just check on Mom, make sure she has her medication, maybe cook her dinner. I'll be back Sunday afternoon. Another red flag. Usually Rob would beg her to come along, complaining that his mother exhausted him or that he needed Grace's medical expertise. Charlotte Cooper, at 76, could be demanding, but Rob typically avoided solo visits. All right, Grace conceded, deciding to play along. Give Charlotte my love. I'll bring her some of that chicken soup she likes when I see her next week. After hanging up, Grace sat at the kitchen table, their wedding photo staring back at her from the wall. His arm around her waist, both smiling broadly. When had things started to change? The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the mysterious text messages he'd quickly delete when she entered the room. She'd ignored the signs for months, maybe even years. The perfume that wasn't hers, the receipts from restaurants they'd never visited together, the way he'd stopped looking directly into her eyes when they talked about their future. Grace's red mug, a gift from her patients when she'd been promoted to charge nurse, sat half full on the table. The coffee had gone cold, just like the feeling spreading through her chest. 13 years together, counting their engagement. 13 years of building a life together, supporting his career in finance, while she pursued her passion for nursing. Was it all unraveling now? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny, a fellow nurse. Can cover your Saturday shift if you still need it. Mark agreed to swap with me. Grace stared at the message, an idea forming. If she wasn't expected at the hospital tomorrow, and Rob believed she would be working, she had an opportunity. 40 minutes later, Grace sat in her car 2 blocks from their house, watching Rob load an overnight bag into his BMW. He checked his hair in the car window reflection, straightened his tie, and even applied what looked like cologne. For his sick mother? The last piece of denial crumbled inside her. She followed him at a safe distance, thankful for the Friday afternoon traffic that provided cover. When Rob took the exit toward his mother's suburban neighborhood, Grace briefly doubted her suspicions. But instead of turning left toward Charlotte Street, he continued straight for another mile, eventually pulling into the driveway of a small rental cottage Grace recognized from a hospital fundraiser last year. Rob checked his phone, smiled, and strode confidently to the door. Before he could knock, it opened, and a young woman with striking red hair pulled him inside with an embrace that was anything but casual. Grace sat frozen, her worst fears confirmed. Tears threatened, but her nurse's training kicked in. Assess the situation, gather information, then act. With trembling fingers, she dialed Claire's number. "Claire, it's Grace," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Remember how you said Charlotte was staying with you this weekend? Well, Rob just told me she was sick again and home alone. No, I'm actually parked outside a cottage watching him go inside with a redhead." Claire's response was immediate and fierce. "That lying piece of— Wait right there. Mom and I are coming. Don't confront him yet. Let's make this interesting." 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours later, Claire's SUV pulled up beside Grace's car. Charlotte Cooper, looking confused but determined in her floral dress and cardigan, clutched a large thermos. "I brought my chicken soup," the elderly woman announced, her white hair perfectly set despite the urgency. "Claire says Robert's friend is sick? Why didn't he bring her to our house? It's much nicer than this little place." Grace and Claire exchanged looks, Claire's eyes communicating what neither wanted to say aloud to Charlotte yet. The older woman had been through enough after losing her husband 3 years ago. Robert was her only son, her pride and joy despite his flaws. "Let's go check on them," Claire said gently, taking her mother's arm. "Grace, you ready?" Grace nodded, her heart hammering. 12 years of marriage. Countless nights waiting up while he worked late. Dreams of starting a family repeatedly postponed because the timing wasn't right. All those sacrifices, leading to this moment. As they approached the cottage door, Charlotte broke free from Claire's grip with surprising agility for a woman her age. "I'll knock. Poor sick girl needs her soup while it's hot." Before either woman could stop her, Charlotte rapped firmly on the door, thermos held high like a trophy. "Robert, it's your mother. I brought soup for your sick friend." The silence that followed Charlotte's enthusiastic announcement stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Grace held her breath, her eyes fixed on the door. Claire stood protectively beside her mother, her jaw clenched in anticipation. Finally, the door opened just enough to reveal Robert's face, drained of all color. His tie was loosened, and his previously perfect hair was disheveled. The cologne that had been so carefully applied now mixed with an unfamiliar perfume scent wafting from inside the cottage. "Mom! Claire! Grace!" His voice cracked on his wife's name, his eyes widening in horror as he took in the 3 women standing on the porch. "What are you— How did you— Where's your sick friend, Robert?" Charlotte pushed past her son with the determination of a woman on a mission, thermos still clutched firmly in her hands. "I made my special chicken soup, the one with extra carrots, and those little pasta stars you loved as a boy." Grace watched as Rob tried to block his mother's entrance, but Charlotte was already inside, her voice carrying through the open door. "Oh, hello there, dear. You must be Robert's friend. My goodness, you do look a bit flushed. I'm Charlotte, Robert's mother." Claire gave Grace's hand a reassuring squeeze before they followed Charlotte inside. The cottage's living room was small but tastefully decorated. On the couch sat a young woman with fiery red hair, hastily buttoning her blouse. She couldn't have been more than 28, her expression a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Yes, I'm Amber," the redhead managed, casting a panicked glance at Robert. "I'm not feeling well, and Rob was just bringing you some medication." Robert interjected quickly. "Amber is a colleague from work. She's new in town and doesn't know many doctors yet." Charlotte nodded sympathetically, placing the thermos on the coffee table and unscrewing the cap. The comforting aroma of homemade chicken soup filled the tense room. "Well, you're in luck, dear. My daughter-in-law Grace here is a nurse, one of the best at Memorial Hospital. She can take a look at you." Grace felt all eyes turn to her. The young woman, Amber, looked mortified, while Robert seemed to be silently pleading. For what? Mercy? Complicity in his lie? After 12 years together, she couldn't believe he expected her to play along. "Actually," Claire said, her voice deceptively casual as she sat down in an armchair, "we were all a bit confused. You see, Rob told Grace that Mom was sick and alone at home, which was strange because Mom has been with me all day and was planning to stay at my house this weekend. Charlotte looked puzzled, ladling soup into a mug she'd found on the coffee table. Sick? Me? I haven't felt this good in months. My arthritis is barely bothering me today. Here, dear, drink this while it's hot. It'll make you feel better in no time. Amber accepted the mug with trembling hands, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Thank you, but I should probably— Wait, she said suddenly, her eyes darting between Robert and Grace. You said daughter-in-law? You're married? The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Robert closed his eyes briefly, as if hoping when he opened them again, this nightmare would be over. Yes, Grace said quietly, finding her voice at last. For 12 years next month. Amber set the mug down with such force that soup sloshed over the sides. You told me you were divorced. He turned to Grace, her expression transforming from embarrassment to anger. I swear I had no idea. He said his divorce was finalized 6 months ago. The revelation hit Grace like a physical blow. This wasn't a one-time indiscretion or a momentary lapse in judgment. Robert had crafted an entire fictional life to present to this woman. How long had this been going on? I can explain everything, Robert started, but Claire cut him off with a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. Please, enlighten us all about how you're simultaneously married to my friend and divorced from her without her knowledge. Charlotte, who had been contentedly arranging crackers on a napkin to go with the soup, looked up in confusion. Divorced? Robert, what is Claire talking about? Did you and Grace separate? Why wouldn't you tell your own mother? The pain in Charlotte's voice was evident, and for a moment, Grace felt sorry for her mother-in-law. Charlotte had always treated Grace like a daughter, had welcomed her into the Cooper family with open arms. This betrayal would hurt her deeply once she fully understood what was happening. Amber stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse from beside the couch. I can't believe this. 6 months of lies. You even took me to your company's holiday party. The holiday party? Grace echoed, remembering how Robert had claimed to be on a business trip that weekend in December. She'd spent Christmas Eve alone at the hospital, volunteering so others could be with their families, believing her husband was working hard for their future. I'm so sorry, Amber said to Grace, genuine remorse in her eyes. If I had known, I would never. She turned to Robert, her voice hardening. You're pathetic. Don't call me again. With that, she pushed past Robert and fled through the front door, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the mug of cooling soup. Charlotte blinked rapidly, looking between her son and the door. She didn't even finish her soup, she said sadly, before the reality of the situation seemed to dawn on her aged face. Robert James Cooper. Was that young lady not really sick? Before Robert could answer, Claire stood and gently took her mother's arm. Mom, why don't we step outside for a minute? I think Grace and Robert need to talk. As Claire led Charlotte to the porch, the elderly woman's confused voice floated back. But the soup will get cold. And why did that girl look so upset? Did Robert say something to hurt her feelings? When the door closed behind them, Grace found herself alone with the man she had loved and trusted for over a decade. The man who now stood before her, a stranger, wearing her husband's face. How long? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace, please, let me. How long? Each word fell like a stone between them. Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. 8 months. But it didn't mean anything. She doesn't mean anything. 8 months, Grace repeated, the full weight of his betrayal crushing down on her. 8 months of lies. 8 months of coming home late, of weekend business trips, of mysterious text messages and hushed phone calls, and our anniversary dinner that you missed last month because of urgent client needs. He couldn't meet her eyes, and that was answer enough. Outside, through the window, Grace could see Claire comforting Charlotte, who appeared to be gradually understanding the situation, her hand pressed against her mouth in shock. 2 women who had been constants in Grace's life for 12 years, who had become her family when her own parents had passed away 5 years ago. Grace turned back to Robert, whose face had shifted from shock to a practiced look of contrition. How many times had she seen that same expression when he'd forgotten her birthday or missed an important dinner with her colleagues? It was the face he wore when he needed forgiveness quickly, so life could return to normal. His normal. "Say something," he pleaded, taking a tentative step toward her. "Yell at me. Throw something. Anything is better than this silence." "What would be the point?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. 12 years, Rob. 12 years of building a life together, and you threw it away for… what exactly? A younger woman who believed you were someone you're not? It was a mistake, he said, reaching for her hand, which she quickly pulled away. A stupid, terrible mistake. I got caught up in the attention, the excitement, but it's you I love, Grace. It's always been you. The words rang hollow in the small cottage living room. Through the window, Grace could see Charlotte dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while Claire spoke to her intently. 8 months isn't a mistake, Grace said, meeting his eyes directly. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, or buying the wrong brand of coffee. This was a choice, Rob. A series of choices, every single day, for 8 months. She glanced around the cottage, taking in details she'd missed in the initial shock. A framed photo of Robert and Amber at what appeared to be a restaurant, a woman's sweater draped over a chair, 2 wine glasses still sitting on the kitchen counter. This isn't just an affair, Grace continued, her nurse's observational skills piecing together the evidence. You've been living a double life. Does she know about the real you? Does she know you snore when you're overtired? Or that you're allergic to shellfish? Does she know you're terrified of heights but pretend not to be? Robert winced at each question. Grace, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling, take some time away together. I'll do whatever it takes. A memory surfaced 3 years ago, after her father's funeral, when Grace had suggested marriage counseling because they'd been growing apart. Robert had dismissed the idea, claiming they were fine, just busy with their careers. Now, with his lie exposed, counseling was suddenly an option. Your mother made soup, Grace said, changing the subject abruptly. Your mother, who you used as an excuse to see another woman. Your mother, who has done nothing but love and support you your entire life. How could you do this to her? To Claire? To me? For the first time, genuine shame crossed Robert's face. Charlotte Cooper had raised him alone after his father abandoned them when Robert was just 10 years old. She had worked 3 jobs to put him through college, had celebrated every achievement, had welcomed Grace into the family as the daughter she never had. I wasn't thinking, he admitted, slumping onto the couch beside the abandoned soup mug. I never meant for any of this to happen. Grace stood by the window, watching Charlotte and Claire on the porch. The older woman was now nodding slowly, her expression hardening from confusion to disappointment as understanding dawned. That's the problem, isn't it? Grace said quietly. You weren't thinking about anyone but yourself, not about your vows, not about your family, not about the future we planned together. The future. The word hung between them like a ghost. Their plans to finally start a family next year. The house they'd been saving for in a better school district. The retirement they'd mapped out. Traveling the world once their careers wound down. All of it built on a foundation that had been silently crumbling beneath them. I still want that future, Robert insisted, standing to approach her again. This doesn't have to be the end, Grace. People make mistakes, even terrible ones, and marriages survive. We can be stronger for this. For a brief, wavering moment, Grace felt the pull of familiarity. 12 years was a long time to share a life with someone. Their routines, their inside jokes, the comfort of knowing exactly what the other person would say before they said it. Could she walk away from all of that? Then she remembered the lies, the nights she'd spent wondering why he was growing distant, the cancelled plans, The way he'd made her feel like she was being paranoid when she'd questioned late nights at the office. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the casual cruelty of maintaining a relationship with another woman while coming home to his wife. "I need to go," Grace said, reaching for her purse. "Claire and Charlotte shouldn't be standing out there any longer." "You're leaving? Just like that?" The panic in Robert's voice was palpable. "We need to talk about this. Figure out what happens next." Grace paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "What happens next is I go home and pack some things. I'll stay at Claire's tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss logistics." "Logistics?" Robert echoed, his face falling. "Is that all our marriage has become? Logistics?" "That's all you left of it," Grace replied, opening the door to reveal Charlotte and Claire still waiting on the porch. Charlotte's eyes were red-rimmed, but her back was straight, her dignity intact, despite the heartbreak evident on her weathered face. "Grace, honey," Charlotte said, reaching for her hand. "I am so sorry. I had no idea my son could do something like this." The genuine remorse in her mother-in-law's voice nearly broke Grace's composure. For 12 years, Charlotte had treated Grace like her own daughter, sharing recipes, offering advice, celebrating holidays together. The thought of losing that connection hurt almost as much as Robert's betrayal. "It's not your fault, Charlotte," Grace assured her, squeezing the older woman's hand. "You raised a good man. The choices he made as an adult aren't your responsibility." Claire stepped forward, her arm going protectively around Grace's shoulders. "Mom and I were just saying that you should come stay with us tonight. You shouldn't be alone. And you certainly shouldn't stay at your house with him." Robert appeared in the doorway behind Grace. "This is between my wife and me, Claire. You don't need to get involved." Claire's eyes flashed with anger. "I got involved the moment you used our mother as an excuse to cheat on my friend. You're lucky all I'm doing is offering Grace a place to stay and not throwing that soup in your face." Charlotte, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to her son with surprising fierceness. "Robert James Cooper, I didn't raise you to be this kind of man. Your father was the liar and the cheat, not you. At least, that's what I thought." The mention of his father hit Robert visibly, his face paling. "Mom, that's not fair. I'm nothing like him." "Aren't you?" Charlotte asked, her voice wavering with emotion. "He lied to me for years, too. He had another family across town. Did you know that? A whole other life he was living while coming home to us. I found out when his other woman showed up at our door, just like we showed up here today." Grace and Claire exchanged surprised looks. This was a part of Charlotte's past she had never shared before. "I stayed with him," Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I forgave him, believed his promises that it would never happen again. And 2 years later, he left us both for someone new. I wasted those years, Robert. I don't want Grace to make the same mistake." Robert stared at his mother, speechless. The family resemblance between them was striking in that moment. The same blue eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw, but the moral chasm between them had never been wider. "Come on, Grace," Claire said gently. "Let's go. Mom's soup is probably still warm in the car. We can have it together at my place." As they walked toward Claire's SUV, Grace felt a weight both crushing and lifting from her shoulders. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours, yet somehow she wasn't alone. The family she had married into was still standing beside her, even as her marriage itself crumbled behind her. The weekend passed in a blur of tears, phone calls, and decisions that seemed impossible to make. Grace had spent Friday night at Claire's comfortable 3-bedroom house, lying awake on the guest bed as memories of her marriage replayed in her mind like scenes from someone else's life. Charlotte had insisted on staying too, occupying Claire's son's old room, his college pennants still adorning the walls. Saturday morning found the 3 women sitting around Claire's kitchen island, mugs of steaming coffee in hand, the silence broken only by the occasional chirp of birds outside the window. The reality of the situation had settled over them like a heavy blanket, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. "He's called 17 times," Grace said, glancing at her phone as it vibrated again with Robert's name on the screen, "and sent 23 text messages." Claire reached over and turned Grace's phone face down on the counter. "You don't have to talk to him until you're ready. You don't have to read his messages either." "He sent me 4 texts, too," Charlotte admitted, her eyes downcast, "asking me to help him fix this, as if I have some magic mother power to make Grace forget what he did." Grace felt a rush of affection for her mother-in-law, who had been utterly steadfast in her support despite the heartbreak of seeing her son's true character revealed. At 76, Charlotte had weathered many storms in her life, but the disappointment in her only son had left new lines around her eyes overnight. "What are you thinking of doing?" Claire asked gently, refilling Grace's coffee mug. "No pressure to decide anything now, of course." Grace stared into the dark liquid, watching her distorted reflection. "I honestly don't know. 12 years isn't something you just walk away from without thinking, but I also don't know how I could ever trust him again." Charlotte reached across the island and placed her weathered hand over Grace's. "When my husband cheated, I convinced myself that forgiveness meant forgetting, that loving someone meant accepting their flaws, even the devastating ones." She paused, her eyes distant with memories. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. I wasted years trying to rebuild something that he had already demolished." "Mom rarely talks about Dad," Claire explained to Grace. "This whole situation has brought up a lot for her." Charlotte nodded. "Robert was just 10 when his father left us for good. I always worried that growing up without a proper male role model would affect him, but I never imagined he'd repeat his father's mistakes." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Claire checked her security camera app and groaned. "It's Robert. Should I tell him to leave?" Grace took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "No, I should talk to him. Not to reconcile, but to make it clear that I need space. We can't avoid each other forever." Claire looked uncertain, but nodded. "We'll be right here if you need us. Just shout, and I'll come throw him out." Grace managed a small smile at her sister-in-law's protective stance. She walked to the front door, conscious of her rumpled appearance. She was still wearing borrowed pajamas from Claire, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. Not that it mattered anymore what Robert thought of how she looked. When she opened the door, the sight of him nearly made her step back. Robert looked terrible. His normally well-groomed appearance had given way to stubble, bloodshot eyes, and wrinkled clothes that suggested he'd slept in them, if he'd slept at all. "Grace," he breathed, relief flooding his face. "Thank God. You weren't answering your phone. I was worried." "Worried about what?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "That I might be doing exactly what you've been doing for 8 months?" He winced. "I deserve that. I deserve all of it. But please, can we talk? Not here on the porch. Maybe we could go for a drive, get some coffee." "I already have coffee," Grace replied, making no move to let him in. "And anything you need to say, you can say here." Robert ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I made a terrible mistake, Grace. The worst mistake of my life. But our marriage is worth fighting for. 12 years together has to count for something." "It counted for something to me," Grace said quietly. "Every day for 12 years, it counted." "I'm just not sure it ever really counted for you?" "That's not fair," he protested. "I love you. I've always loved you. Love isn't just a feeling, Robert. It's a choice you make every day. And for 8 months, you chose someone else." He stepped closer, desperation etched on his face. "I'll do anything to fix this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I'll change jobs if that would help. I've already blocked Amber's number and deleted all contact with her." Grace crossed her arms, suddenly aware of how chilly the morning was. Or perhaps it was just the cold realization that the man before her was still thinking only of himself, of what he might lose, rather than the pain he had caused. "That's supposed to impress me? That you've cut ties with your mistress, now that you've been caught?" She shook her head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about Amber. It's about the lying, the manipulation, using your own mother as an alibi for your affair. At the mention of Charlotte, shame darkened Robert's expression. How is Mom? Is she okay? No, she's not okay, Grace replied honestly. She's heartbroken. Not just for me, but for you. For the son she thought she raised. Robert leaned against the porch railing, suddenly looking deflated. I never meant to hurt her. Or you. It just happened. Affairs don't just happen, Robert. They're built on hundreds of small decisions, hundreds of moments when you could have chosen differently. Inside the house, Grace could hear movement. Charlotte and Claire were likely hovering nearby, giving her space, but ready to intervene if needed. The knowledge of their support strengthened her resolve. I need time, Grace said finally. Time away from you, away from us, to figure out what I want. I'm going to stay with Claire for a few days, then find a place of my own. Our home is your home, Robert insisted. If anyone should move out, it's me. That house hasn't felt like home for a long time, Grace admitted. The truth of the words surprising even her. Even before I knew about Amber, something was missing. You were missing, even when you were physically there. The realization settled between them, weighty and undeniable. For months, perhaps years, they had been going through the motions of a marriage while growing further apart. The affair was a symptom of a deeper problem, not the cause. So, that's it? Robert asked, his voice breaking. 12 years, and you're just walking away? Grace felt a flash of anger, quick and hot. I'm not the one who walked away, Robert. You did that the moment you decided our vows weren't worth keeping. Before he could respond, the door opened wider behind Grace. Claire stood there, her expression making it clear she'd heard enough. I think Grace has said what she needed to say, Claire told her brother firmly. You should go now. This is between my wife and me, Robert snapped. Not anymore, Claire replied evenly. You made it about all of us when you dragged Mom into your lies. As if summoned by her mention, Charlotte appeared behind Claire, her small frame dignified despite the sadness etching her face. Robert, go home. Give Grace the space she's asking for. If there's any chance of salvaging anything from this mess, it starts with respecting her wishes. The sight of his mother's disappointment seemed to deflate Robert completely. He nodded once, turned, and walked back to his car without another word. The three women watched as he drove away, his taillights disappearing around the corner. Back inside, Grace collapsed onto Claire's couch, the emotional exhaustion of the confrontation finally catching up with her. Charlotte sat beside her, patting her hand with maternal affection. You did well, dear, the older woman said softly. Better than I did when I was in your shoes. Claire brought in fresh coffee and sat across from them. So what now? What do you need, Grace? Grace considered the question, realizing no one had asked her that in a very long time. What she needed, what she wanted. She had spent so many years accommodating Robert's career, Robert's schedule, Robert's desires, that her own had faded into the background. I think, she said slowly, I need to remember who I am without him. Before I can decide whether there's anything left to save, I need to know if I even want to try. Charlotte nodded approvingly. That's the wisest thing I've heard in a long time. And whatever you decide, you won't go through it alone. Grace looked between the two women, her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law, and felt, amid all the pain and confusion, a profound sense of gratitude. She had lost a husband, but she hadn't lost her family. Later that afternoon, Grace's phone buzzed with a text notification. Bracing herself for another plea from Robert, she was surprised to see Amber's name instead. The message was simple. I truly didn't know he was married. I'm so sorry for the pain this has caused you. You deserve better. Grace stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel about this communication from the woman who had, however unwittingly, become entangled in the unraveling of her marriage. There was no anger in the words, no justification, just a simple acknowledgement of hurt and an apology. She showed the message to Claire, who was helping her sort through the clothes they'd picked up from the house while Robert was at work. "Well," Claire said, raising an eyebrow, "at least one of them has the decency to apologize without making excuses." Grace nodded, setting the phone aside without replying. She wasn't ready to offer forgiveness to anyone yet, but the message had clarified something important. This wasn't a story with villains and victims as much as it was about choices and consequences, about the ripple effects of deception that touched everyone involved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Claire's living room, Charlotte appeared with 3 bowls of reheated chicken soup, the same batch she had brought to the cottage the day before. "It always tastes better the second day," she insisted, handing Grace a bowl. "And we could all use some comfort food." The simple normality of sharing a meal with these 2 women who had become her family felt like the first solid ground Grace had found since her world had collapsed. Whatever came next, divorce, separation, some attempt at reconciliation, she would face it with a strength she hadn't known she possessed, and a support system she hadn't realized was so unshakable. 3 months passed, with the steady rhythm of seasons changing. Summer heat gave way to crisp autumn air. Leaves turned from green to brilliant gold, and Grace Cooper slowly rebuilt her life piece by piece. She had found a small but comfortable apartment near the hospital, its walls gradually filling with new photographs, new memories that were entirely her own. The divorce proceedings had begun without drama or fanfare. Robert had finally stopped calling every day, his desperate pleas giving way to resigned acceptance, when Grace made it clear her decision was final. Their shared belongings had been divided, the house put up for sale, 12 years of marriage distilled into assets and liabilities on legal documents. On this particular Sunday afternoon in October, Grace sat on Charlotte Cooper's back porch, a mug of hot apple cider warming her hands as she watched golden leaves drift from the maple tree in the yard. Sunday gatherings at Charlotte's had become a new tradition over the past months, sometimes just the 3 of them, sometimes joined by Claire's teenage children when they weren't busy with school activities. "More cider, dear?" Charlotte asked, appearing at the screen door with the steaming pot. At 76, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her eyes remained bright and alert, her mind as sharp as ever. "Yes, please," Grace smiled, holding out her mug. "It's perfect on a day like this." Charlotte refilled the mug, then eased herself into the rocking chair beside Grace. Claire called. "She's running a bit late." Her son's soccer game went into overtime. Grace nodded, content in the comfortable silence that settled between them. It still amazed her sometimes how seamlessly she had maintained her relationship with Robert's family, even as her marriage dissolved. In the aftermath of the affair, it had been Charlotte and Claire who rallied around her, who helped her find the strength to walk away instead of staying in a marriage built on broken trust. "I saw Maureen from my bridge club yesterday," Charlotte said casually, rocking gently in her chair. "He mentioned seeing Robert at the supermarket. Said he looked like he'd lost weight." Grace nodded, feeling a distant pang that was no longer the sharp pain it once had been. His sister mentioned the same thing when she saw him last week. Charlotte studied Grace's face carefully. "Does it still hurt to talk about him?" "Not like it did," Grace answered honestly. "It's more like remembering an old injury. You know exactly where it was, but the pain has faded." The older woman nodded with understanding. "That's how healing works. One day you realize you've gone a whole day without thinking about it, then a week, then longer. The heart mends itself in quiet moments when we're not paying attention." The wisdom in Charlotte's words resonated deeply. 3 months ago, Grace couldn't imagine a day without the acute sting of betrayal. Now, she had built a routine that felt increasingly like her own, picking up extra shifts at the hospital, starting a long-postponed master's degree in nursing administration, reconnecting with friends she had inadvertently neglected during her marriage. The screen door creaked open, and Claire emerged with a plate of pumpkin muffins. "Sorry I'm late. Between the soccer game going long and traffic, I thought I'd never get here." "We were just enjoying the quiet," Charlotte assured her daughter, reaching for a muffin. How was the game? They won, Claire said proudly, settling into the third chair. Jason scored the winning goal. As Claire launched into details of her son's athletic prowess, Grace felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. These Sunday afternoons had become anchors in her week, reminders that family wasn't always defined by legal documents or shared last names. The conversation drifted comfortably between topics: Claire's work at the elementary school where she taught, Charlotte's upcoming cataract surgery, Grace's progress on her master's program. No mention of Robert until the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew their attention. Grace recognized the BMW immediately, her stomach tightening slightly as she watched Robert emerge from the driver's side. He looked thinner indeed, his face more angular, his clothes hanging a bit loosely on his frame. He carried a folder tucked under his arm as he approached the porch steps. "I didn't know he was coming today," Claire said quietly, her expression concerned as she glanced at Grace. "Mom, did you invite him?" Charlotte shook her head. "No, but he is still my son. He stops by sometimes when he thinks you two won't be here." Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's okay. We were bound to run into each other eventually." Robert hesitated at the bottom of the steps when he spotted Grace, clearly as surprised to see her as she was to see him. For a moment, he seemed to consider retreating to his car, but then squared his shoulders and continued up to the porch. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it once carried. "I didn't realize you'd have company, Mom." "It's Sunday," Charlotte replied simply. "Grace and Claire always come for Sunday afternoon tea. You would know that if you visited more regularly." The gentle rebuke hung in the air as Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I can come back another time." "Nonsense," Charlotte waved dismissively. "There's plenty of cider, and Claire brought enough muffins to feed an army. Sit down, Robert." Grace watched as her ex-husband, the divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks ago, reluctantly took the fourth chair, placing the folder on the small table between them. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. Beyond the weight loss, there was a weariness in his eyes, a humility in his posture that hadn't been there before. "How have you been, Grace?" he asked cautiously. "Good," she answered truthfully. "Busy with work and school, but good." He nodded, a flicker of genuine happiness crossing his face. "The master's program? You finally started it?" "Yes. Should be finished by next spring." "That's great. You always wanted to do that." There was no resentment in his voice, just a wistful acknowledgement of dreams he had once known intimately. An awkward silence fell, broken by Charlotte offering Robert cider and muffins, which he accepted gratefully. Claire maintained a polite but cool demeanor, her loyalty to Grace evident in every carefully measured word she spoke to her brother. After several minutes of stilted small talk about the weather and Charlotte's upcoming doctor appointments, Robert cleared his throat and reached for the folder he had brought. "Actually, Mom, I came by to drop off these papers for you to sign. The retirement account transfer we discussed?" "Ah, yes," Charlotte nodded, taking the folder. "I'll look them over later." Another silence descended, this one heavier than before. Grace could feel Robert's eyes on her occasionally, could sense the unasked questions, the unspoken regrets. Finally, he turned to her directly. "I heard from Kevin at the hospital that you're being considered for the nurse manager position in the ER. Congratulations." Grace smiled, genuinely pleased that he knew. "Thank you. It's not official yet, but I'm hopeful. You'll get it," he said with certainty. "You're the most qualified person they could choose?" The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. During their marriage, Robert had often been supportive of her career in theory, but dismissive of her ambitions in practice. Now, the pride in his tone seemed unmarred by any self-interest. Charlotte, ever perceptive, stood up slowly. "Claire, would you help me look through these documents inside? My reading glasses are on the kitchen counter." Claire appeared ready to protest, clearly reluctant to leave Grace alone with Robert, but a pointed look from her mother silenced her objections. "Of course, Mom. Let's go inside where the light is better." As the screen door closed behind them, Robert and Grace were left alone on the porch. The only sounds the gentle creaking of Charlotte's rocking chair and the distant call of birds preparing for their southern migration. "They're not very subtle, are they?" Robert said with a sad smile. "They're protective," Grace replied. "They care about me." "I'm glad," he said softly. "I'm glad you have them, that you didn't lose them because of what I did." Grace studied his face, realizing with a start that she could look at him now without feeling the sharp stab of betrayal. When had that happened? When had the acute pain transformed into this dull, distant ache? "Your mom told me something important, early on," Grace said. "She said that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, and it isn't even necessarily about reconciliation. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger so you can move forward." Robert nodded slowly. "She's a wise woman. Wiser than I gave her credit for most of my life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Have you? Forgiven me, I mean?" Grace considered the question, watching a maple leaf spiral down from the tree. "I'm working on it," she answered honestly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying around anger was exhausting. I wouldn't blame you if you hated me forever," he said quietly. "What I did was unforgivable." "Nothing is unforgivable, Robert. But forgiveness doesn't mean I want you back in my life." He nodded, accepting her words without argument. "I understand. I just want you to know that I regret what I did every single day. Not just getting caught, but the choices I made, the person I became." He looked down at his hands. "You deserved so much better." "Yes," Grace agreed simply. "I did." The directness of her response seemed to catch him off guard. But then he smiled slightly. "That's one of the things I always loved about you. Your honesty. I should have valued it more when I had the chance." Inside the house, they could hear Charlotte's laugh mingling with Claire's voice, the comfortable sounds of family on a Sunday afternoon. Robert glanced toward the door with unmistakable longing. "They miss you too, you know," Grace said, surprising herself with the observation. "Especially your mom. She's disappointed in what you did, but she still loves you. She's still your mother." Robert's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "I've been trying to make it up to her, coming by more often, helping with things around the house. I don't know if it will ever be enough." "Just keep showing up," Grace advised. "That's all any of us can do, really. Keep showing up, day after day, trying to be better than we were before." The wisdom of her own words settled over her like a comfortable blanket. That's exactly what she had been doing these past 3 months, showing up for herself, for her new life, for the future she was building one day at a time. Robert stood, sensing their conversation had reached its natural conclusion. "I should go. Let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday with Mom and Claire." Grace nodded, making no move to prolong the interaction. "Take care of yourself, Robert." He hesitated at the top of the steps, turning back to her with a question in his eyes. "Do you think someday we might not get back together, but maybe be friends? For Mom's sake, at holidays or family gatherings?" Grace considered his question, appreciating that he wasn't asking for more than might be possible. "I don't know," she answered truthfully, "but I'm not closing any doors completely. Time has a way of putting things in perspective." He seemed satisfied with that answer, offering a small smile before descending the steps. Grace watched as he walked to his car, a familiar figure now made strange by circumstance and choice, by broken promises and painful growth. When the screen door opened again, Claire and Charlotte emerged cautiously, looking between Grace and the departing BMW. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, resuming her seat. Grace smiled, feeling the truth of her answer in her bones. "Yes, I really am." Charlotte reached over to squeeze Grace's hand. "You know, when my husband left all those years ago, I thought my family was broken forever. I never imagined that someday I'd be sitting here with my daughter, and the woman who came into our lives as my son's wife, but stayed as something much more important." "What's that?" Grace asked, touched by the emotion in Charlotte's voice. "Family," the older woman said simply. The kind we choose, which is sometimes stronger than the kind we're born into. Claire raised her mug in a small toast. To family, the real kind. As the three women sat together, watching the sun begin its descent behind Charlotte's maple tree, Grace felt the final piece of her healing heart lock into place. The past could not be changed. The pain and betrayal would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. That belonged to her alone, to shape as she chose, surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected way. The red mug in her hands, identical to the one she had left behind in her former home, caught the last golden rays of sunlight. Charlotte had bought it for her after noticing how Grace always reached for the same mug during their Sunday gatherings. Everyone needs their own special cup, she had said, presenting it to Grace with a flourish. It was a small thing, that mug, just ceramic and glaze, formed into a simple vessel. But as Grace held it between her palms, feeling its warmth and the love of the women beside her, she knew it represented something profound. The capacity to begin again, to fill an empty space with something new and beautiful, to find wholeness even after being broken. More cider? Charlotte offered, already reaching for the pot. Yes, Grace smiled, extending her mug. Always more. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.